What have you done? You done!
The most powerful man in Texas slammed into a homeless man on Highway 290, and for 5 seconds, he thought about driving away until he saw them in his rearview mirror. Over 100 bikers across the street recording everything. When the Hells Angels showed up at the governor's mansion that night, they didn't come for blood. They came for something that would hurt him far worse, and what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew. Before we get into this story, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Are you at home, on your commute, maybe sneaking this in at work? I love connecting with you, my audience, from all corners of the world. Drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you believe that real justice isn't about revenge, but about restoring someone's humanity, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get into the story. The sun hung over the Texas highway like a warning. Heavy, golden, merciless. Heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, distorting the horizon until the whole world seemed to ripple and bend. A single billboard stood crooked against the sky, its faded letters bleeding into the white paint. God bless Texas. Beneath it, in a narrow strip of shade it offered, sat a man the world had forgotten. His name was June. He wasn't young anymore. Lines carved deep into his sun-darkened face told stories he'd stopped sharing years ago. His clothes hung loose on his frame, threadbare and dust-stained, but his eyes, those eyes still held something. Not hope exactly, maybe stubbornness, maybe dignity that refused to die even when everything else had. In his weathered hands, he held a cardboard sign, hand-painted in careful block letters, hungry but hopeful. Traffic was light. A few semis rumbled past, their drivers too focused on the road ahead to notice the man on the shoulder. June didn't blame them. He'd been invisible for so long. He sometimes wondered if he was still real. But he stayed and waited, because what else was there to do? Then came a sound, low at first, a hum that grew into a growl. Expensive engines pushing expensive metal down the highway faster than they should. June looked up, squinting against the glare. 3 black SUVs, state-issued, polished to a mirror shine, windows tinted, so dark you couldn't see who sat inside. But June knew. Everyone knew those vehicles. The governor's convoy. The lead SUV cut across the lane without signaling, swerving toward the shoulder. June barely had time to register what was happening. 1 second he was sitting. The next, the world exploded into screeching tires, burning rubber, and the sickening thud of metal meeting flesh. He hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, sent his signs spinning into the dust. Pain bloomed across his ribs, his hip, the back of his skull. For a moment, everything went white. Then came the silence, thick, suffocating, broken only by the idling engine of the SUV and the faint ringing in June's ears. Inside the vehicle, Governor Matthew Connolly gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. His jaw clenched. He glanced at the rearview mirror, then at the crumpled figure in the dust behind him. His lips moved, forming a single word under his breath. Damn it! His hand hovered over the gear shift. Drive or reverse? Stop or go? His mind raced through calculations. Optics, damage control, plausible deniability. The other SUVs had already sped ahead, oblivious. No witnesses, no cameras, just heat, dust, and a homeless man no one would miss. His foot pressed the gas, but then he stopped, not out of conscience, out of uncertainty. He checked the mirror again, scanning the empty highway. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A low rumble rising from somewhere across the road. Deep, steady, growing louder. Engines, not just one. Dozens. Connolly's eyes snapped to the opposite side of the highway. There, parked in a loose formation outside a roadside diner, sat a sea of chrome and black leather. Harleys. Big, growling machines with men perched on them like sentinels. Their helmets caught the sunlight, visors down, faces hidden. But their stillness spoke volumes. They'd seen everything. One of them, broad-shouldered, arms crossed, a patch on his vest that read Hell's Angels Missouri Chapter, tilted his head slightly. The visor reflected nothing but the governor's SUV and the man bleeding on the ground. Connolly's breath caught. His hand trembled on the wheel. He couldn't see their faces, couldn't read their intentions, but he could feel their eyes burning through the glass, through his expensive suit, straight into the part of him that knew. He just made a mistake he couldn't spin away. Across the street, the engines revved. Once, twice. A reminder, a promise. The man who ran the state just ran over a man with nothing, and thought no one saw. 10 minutes earlier, the diner had been nothing but grease, laughter, and the clink of coffee mugs against worn formica. Fred, Big Rig, Lawson sat at the corner booth, a mountain of a man with a gray beard that fell to his chest and hands scarred from decades of wrenches and road rash. Across from him, tough Achilleen, tattooed, with eyes that had seen too many fights to start one without reason, flipped through a dog-eared road map. Ricky Rubio leaned against the jukebox, feeding it quarters, his leather vest creaking as he moved. They weren't looking for trouble. Never were. The Hells Angels Missouri chapter had rolled into town for a charity ride, veterans mostly, men who'd given everything and gotten nothing back. The kind of work that didn't make headlines, but kept Fred's conscience clean at night. Then came a sound. It cut through the diner's hum like a blade, tires shrieking, metal crunching, then silence so heavy it made everyone freeze. Fred's head snapped toward the window. Across the highway, a black SUV sat crooked on the shoulder, dust still hanging in the air like a ghost. And on the ground, barely visible through the haze, a man lay motionless. Jesus, AK muttered, already moving. Fred was faster. He was out the door before the bells above it stopped jingling, boots hitting pavement hard. The other bikers followed, 20, 30, then more, spilling out of the diner and off their bikes like a wave of leather and steel. Ricky was already pulling his phone out, fingers steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Fred reached June first. The man was conscious, barely. Blood seeped from a gash above his eyebrow, his breathing shallow and ragged. His cardboard sign lay a few feet away, one corner torn and fluttering in the breeze. "Easy, brother," Fred said, kneeling beside him. His voice was low, calm, the kind of tone that steadied scared horses and frightened men. "We got you. You're going to be all right." AK was already on the phone with 911, his words clipped and efficient. Ricky crouched on June's other side, checking his pulse, his ribs, the angle of his leg. No wasted movement. No panic. Just years of experience handling crises on the road. Fred's eyes flicked up. The SUV was still idling 50 feet away. He could see the driver inside, suit, slicked hair, hands gripping the wheel like he was deciding something. Then the vehicle jerked forward, rolling slowly at first, then faster. "Ain't that the governor's car?" Fred said, his voice flat. AK glanced up from his phone. "Plates match. State issue." Ricky didn't look away from June, but his jaw tightened. So he hit him and just what? Drove off. "Not yet," Fred said quietly. "But he's thinking about it." The SUV picked up speed, merging back onto the highway. Within seconds, it was gone, just a black speck disappearing into the heat shimmer. The other two vehicles in the convoy had already vanished, oblivious or complicit. Either way, it didn't matter. Ricky held his phone steady, recording the scene. The tire marks, the blood on the asphalt, June's crumpled sign. Not for clout, not for likes, for evidence, for accountability. Because men like the governor counted on people like June having no voice. And men like Fred made damn sure that assumption was wrong. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing. Paramedics rushed over, but Fred didn't move until they'd stabilized June and loaded him onto the stretcher. Only then did he stand, brushing dust off his jeans, his face unreadable. One of the younger bikers, a kid named Tommy with more anger than sense, stepped forward, fists clenched. "We gonna find him? Make him pay." Fred turned slowly, his gaze heavy. "We'll handle it our way." "What's that mean?" Tommy pressed. "Means we don't do what people expect," AK said, lighting a cigarette. "We do what's right." Ricky pocketed his phone, the footage saved, backed up, ready. "Governor thinks power's a shield. We're about to remind him it's a responsibility." Fred looked back at the highway, at the empty space where the SUV had been. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and certain. He ran, Fred said quietly. But he can't hide. The engines around him growled in agreement. The State House stood like a fortress in the center of Austin, all limestone columns and Texas pride, bathed in the amber glow of late afternoon sun. Governor Matthew Connolly's SUV rolled through the security gate without slowing, past guards who saluted without question, into the underground parking garage where cameras conveniently had blind spots and secrets stay buried. Connolly killed the engine and sat in the silence. His hands were still trembling, not from fear. He'd convinced himself it wasn't fear, but from adrenaline, from the shock of impact, from the split-second decision he'd made on that highway shoulder, the one that now sat in his gut like a stone. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair still perfect, tie straight, no blood on his hands. Literally, anyway, he could handle this. He'd handled worse. Straightening his jacket, Connolly stepped out of the SUV and strode toward the elevator, his shoes clicking against concrete with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. The doors slid open. He pressed the button for the third floor, his office, his domain, where he controlled narratives and bent reality to his will. By the time he reached his desk, he'd almost convinced himself it hadn't happened. His aide, Marcus, young, sharp-eyed, too ambitious for his own good, was waiting inside, tablet in hand, jaw tight. The kid looked nervous. That was Marcus's problem, always sweating the small stuff. "Governor," Marcus said carefully, "we need to talk." Connolly waved him off, settling into his leather chair. "Not now. Schedule's packed. What's the damage from the infrastructure vote?" "Sir, it's not about the vote." Marcus hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's been chatter." Connolly's fingers paused over his keyboard. "Chatter. Social media. A few posts. Nothing major yet, but..." Marcus swiped his tablet, turning it toward the governor. "Someone filmed something." The blood drained from Connolly's face, but he kept his expression neutral. On the screen was a grainy video, shot from across a highway. A black SUV. A man on the ground. Dust. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, rows of motorcycles, chrome glinting in the sun. The caption read, "Governor's convoy just hit a homeless man and drove off." Hell's Angels saw everything. Connolly's jaw clenched. He snatched the tablet, eyes scanning the comments below. Most were skeptical, blurry footage, no clear plates, could be anyone. But some were already digging, already asking questions, already tagging news outlets. "How many views?" Connolly asked, his voice sharp. 4,000. Growing. Connolly shoved the tablet back at Marcus and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose. 4,000. Nothing. A drop in the digital ocean. By tomorrow, it'd be buried under cat videos and celebrity gossip. People didn't care about homeless men. They never had. They wouldn't dare. Connolly muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. "Sir, the bikers." Connolly's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think some leather-wearing thugs are going to come after a sitting governor? They know how this works. They know who I am." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, sir, the Hells Angels aren't exactly known for backing down." Connolly laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Neither am I." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the Capitol grounds. Down below, tourists snapped photos. Interns hurried between buildings. Life moved on, oblivious. That's how it always worked. The powerful stayed powerful because people let them, because the system protected them, because names like Governor Matthew Connolly carried weight that crushed dissent before it could breathe. "Pull the video," Connolly said without turning around. "Call our contacts at the platforms. Copyright claim, misinformation, I don't care. Just bury it." "Already tried," Marcus admitted. "It's being reposted faster than we can take it down." Connolly's reflection in the glass went cold. "Then we deny. No comment. If pressed, we say I was never on that highway today. My schedule shows I was in meetings all afternoon." "Your detail will say what I tell them to say." Connolly turned, fixing Marcus with a stare that had made legislators fold and journalists back off. This is politics, Marcus. First rule, control the narrative. Second rule, never apologize. You apologize, you admit guilt. You admit guilt, you're done. Marcus nodded slowly, but the doubt in his eyes lingered. And if they push back, the bikers? Connolly waved a hand dismissively. Let them. What are they going to do? Storm the state house? They're nobodies. Criminals playing dress up. They don't have lawyers, lobbyists, or leverage. I do. But even as he said it, something gnawed at him. The way those bikers had sat across the highway, engines growling, watching. Not moving, not reacting, just waiting, like they knew something he didn't. Connolly shook the thought away. Paranoia, guilt trying to worm its way in. He wouldn't let it. Get back to work, he told Marcus, and keep monitoring the chatter. If it spikes, we'll release a counterstatement. Until then, we stay quiet. Marcus left, and Connolly was alone again. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter on his desk, a gift from an oil exec whose name he couldn't remember, and downed it in one swallow. The burn felt good, grounding. He was untouchable. Always had been. His phone buzzed. A news alert. He swiped it open. Viral video claims Texas governor involved in hit and run. Witnesses include Hell's Angels MC. His hand tightened around the glass. Another buzz. Another alert. Then another. The story was spreading. Not slowly, but exponentially. News vans. Reporters. Hashtags trending. The video had gone from 4,000 views to 40,000 in minutes. Connolly set the glass down carefully, his breathing controlled. This was fine. Manageable. He'd faced scandals before. Media firestorms. Public outrage. All it took was time, spin, and money. He had all 3. But then his phone rang. Private number. He almost didn't answer. Governor Connolly, he said smoothly. Silence on the other end. Then a low voice, rough, deliberate like gravel under tires. You ran. Connolly's throat tightened. Who is this? You know who. Fred. Listen to me very carefully, Connolly said, voice hardening. Whatever you think you saw, whatever little stunt you're planning, it ends now. You're messing with the wrong person. No, Fred replied calmly. You messed with the wrong person. His name's June, and you left him bleeding in the dirt like he was nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. We have the footage. Every angle. Every second. And we're not looking for money. We're not looking for attention. Fred paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was colder than anything Connolly had ever heard. We're looking for you. The line went dead. Connolly stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, his pulse hammering in his temples. Outside his window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Capitol lawn. Somewhere in the distance, faint but growing louder, came a sound that didn't belong in the city. Engines. Deep. Rumbling. Dozens of them. Connolly moved to the window, pulling back the curtain. At first, he saw nothing. Then, at the edge of the Capitol grounds, emerging from the twilight like ghosts made of steel and leather, came the motorcycles. 1, 10, 50, 100. They rolled in formation, slow and deliberate, headlights cutting through the dusk. At the front, a massive biker with a gray beard raised one hand. Not a threat, not a gesture of aggression, just acknowledgement. We see you. Connolly stumbled back from the window, his breath coming fast. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Outside, the engines roared, not in anger, but in promise. Thunder rolling across the plains. Coming closer. The governor's mansion sat on a hill overlooking Austin like a crown jewel. White columns, manicured lawns, security lights that turned night into artificial day. It was a fortress built on power, insulated by gates and guards and the weight of a title that made most people look away. But not tonight. The rumble started low, like distant thunder rolling in before storm. Then it grew, deeper, louder, until the ground itself seemed to vibrate. One by one, headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through the tree-lined street leading to the mansion. Chrome gleamed. Leather creaked. Exhaust pipes growled in unison as 100 Harleys rolled to a stop, forming a wall of steel and intention across the governor's front lawn. Inside the mansion, the lights flickered. Connolly stood in his study, bourbon glass frozen halfway to his lips, watching through the window as the motorcycles assembled like soldiers at attention. His security team scrambled, radios crackling, hands hovering over sidearms, voices tight with uncertainty. They'd trained for protesters, for threats, for violence. Not this. Not quiet, organized patience that somehow felt more dangerous than any weapon. "Sir, we need to move you to the safe room," his head of security said, appearing in the doorway. Connolly didn't move. Couldn't. His eyes were locked on the scene below, the bikers dismounting in synchronized silence, boots hitting pavement, faceless behind their helmets. At the front of the formation stood 3 men, unhelmeted now, their faces illuminated by the mansion's security lights. Fred Big Rig Lawson, Tough AK, Ricky Rubio. They weren't shouting, weren't holding signs or making demands. They were just there, waiting. And somehow that was worse than anything Connolly could have imagined. "Sir," the security chief pressed. "No." Connolly set down his glass, straightened his tie. "I'm not hiding in my own home from a bunch of bikers." He descended the stairs, each step measured, his political mask sliding into place. Chin up, shoulders back, the posture of a man who'd stared down legislators and intimidated journalists. By the time he reached the front door, he'd almost convinced himself he was in control. The iron gate stood between him and the bikers. His guards flanked him, hands on holsters, eyes scanning for threats. Beyond the gate, the Hell's Angels waited in perfect stillness. Engines off now, the silence somehow louder than the roar had been. Fred stepped forward. 1 step, 2. Then he stopped at the gate and knocked. Once deliberately, knuckles ringing against iron like a judge's gavel. The guards tensed. Connolly raised a hand, stopping them from drawing weapons. He approached the gate, close enough to see the lines etched into Fred's weathered face, the gray in his beard, the absolute calm in his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" Connolly's voice carried across the lawn, sharp with authority. "Do you have any idea what you're doing right now?" Fred didn't flinch, didn't blink. When he spoke, his voice was steady, almost gentle, the kind of tone that made threats unnecessary. "We do. That's the problem." Connolly's jaw tightened. "You're trespassing on state property. I can have every one of you arrested." "You could," Fred agreed. "Won't change what you did. I didn't do anything. You hit a man and drove away." AK's voice cut through the night, cold and factual. "We saw it, recorded it, the whole damn thing." Connolly felt sweat bead at his temples despite the cool night air. "If you think you can blackmail me." "We're not here for money," Ricky interrupted, stepping forward to stand beside Fred. "We're not here for fame. We're not even here for an apology. Words are cheap, and yours are cheaper than most." "Then what the hell do you want?" Connolly snapped, his composure cracking. Fred's expression didn't change. "You're gonna make this right. I don't know what you are." "His name is June," Fred said quietly. "The man you hit. The man you left bleeding on the side of the road like trash. He's got a name, a story, a life that matters just as much as yours. Maybe more." Connolly opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, his security team shifted nervously. Behind Fred, 100 bikers stood motionless, their presence a wall of silent judgment. "You want justice," Connolly finally said, forcing a laugh. "Take me to court. Sue me. Do whatever you think you can do. But I'm not going anywhere with you." Fred studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He turned as if to leave, then paused. "But before we go, you should know something. That video we haven't released it yet. Haven't shown it to the media, the cops, nobody." Connolly's chest tightened. "Why not?" "Because we wanted to give you a chance." Fred turned back, his eyes hard. "A chance to be the man you pretend to be in your speeches. The man who talks about serving the people, protecting the vulnerable, leading with integrity. That's what I..." "No." Fred's voice dropped, cutting through Connolly's words like a blade. "That's who you tell people you are. Tonight you get to prove it. Come with us. Face what you did. Make it right with your actions, not your PR team." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Connolly could feel eyes on him, his guards, the bikers, probably neighbors peering through windows, phones recording in the darkness. Every second he stood there, frozen with indecision. The hole he was digging grew deeper. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Fred's expression didn't change. "Then we release everything. Let the world decide what kind of man runs their state." It wasn't a threat. It was a choice. And somehow that made it worse. Connolly had spent his career controlling narratives, spinning mistakes into victories, burying scandals before they breathed. But this was different. These men didn't want his power or his money. They wanted something he couldn't fake. Accountability. The word tasted bitter in his mind. "Open the gate," Connolly said quietly. His head of security stepped forward. "Sir, I strongly advise." "Open it." The lock clicked. The gate swung open with a metallic groan that sounded like surrender. Fred didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply stepped aside, gesturing toward his motorcycle, a massive Harley that looked like it had crossed 1,000 miles of hard road. "Get on," Fred said. Connolly stared at the bike, then at Fred, then at the 100 bikers watching in silence. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to call his lawyers, to hide behind the walls and titles that had always protected him. But those walls felt paper-thin now. He walked forward, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the motorcycle, he hesitated, hands hovering awkwardly. He'd never been on a bike in his life, never had to rely on someone else to steer. Fred swung a leg over the seat, kicked the engine to life. The growl vibrated through Connolly's chest as he climbed on behind him, gripping the sides awkwardly, his expensive suit already dusty from the road. Around them, engines roared to life in sequence, a chorus of thunder that shook the mansion's windows. Fred glanced back over his shoulder. "Hold on, Governor. Where we're going, your title don't mean a damn thing." The convoy pulled away, leaving the mansion behind, its lights still burning, its guards still watching, its emptiness somehow louder than the motorcycles fading into the Texas night. The ride of reckoning. The highway stretched endlessly into darkness, swallowing the convoy of motorcycles like the throat of some vast, indifferent beast. Connolly clung to Fred's jacket, knuckles white, his body rigid with fear and fury, and something else he couldn't name. The wind tore at his hair, his tie whipping over his shoulder like a surrender flag. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through his spine, reminding him he wasn't in control. Not of the bike, not of the situation, not of anything. Fred didn't speak, didn't need to. The rumble of the engine and the endless stretch of Texas plain said everything. Around them, headlights formed a constellation, 100 witnesses to the governor's fall from grace, riding in formation like honor guards escorting a prisoner. Connolly had never felt so small. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the skeletal silhouettes of oiled derricks and the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse. Stars burned overhead, cold and indifferent. Out here, there were no cameras, no aids, no carefully crafted statements. Just the road, the night, and the weight of what he'd done pressing down on him like a stone. His mind raced. What were they planning? Where were they taking him? Every crime drama he'd half-watched flickered through his thoughts. Isolated locations, shallow graves, justice delivered outside the law. But Fred's posture remained relaxed, his grip on the handlebars steady. Not the body language of a man planning violence. Somehow, that made it worse. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the hospital appeared on the horizon, a squat, utilitarian building with 2 bright fluorescent lights bleeding into the parking lot. Not the private medical center where Connolly got his annual physicals. This was a county hospital, the kind that served everyone else. The kind with peeling paint and overworked nurses and waiting rooms filled with people who couldn't afford better. The convoy pulled into the parking lot, engines cutting one by one until silence settled like dust. Fred dismounted first, then stood waiting. Connolly climbed off awkwardly, his legs unsteady, his designer shoes scraping against asphalt that smelled like exhaust and desperation. "This way," Fred said simply, walking toward the entrance. Connolly followed, because what else could he do? The other bikers didn't surround him or grab his arms. They just formed a loose perimeter, their presence a reminder that running wasn't an option. Not physically, not morally. The hospital's automatic doors hissed open. Inside, the lighting was harsh and unforgiving, turning everyone's skin sallow. A tired nurse looked up from her station, eyes widening slightly at the sight of leather vests and road dust, then narrowing when she recognized the man in the rumpled suit. "Room 214, she said quietly to Fred, her tone carrying an edge of satisfaction. Fred nodded and moved down the hallway. Connolly's feet felt like lead, but he followed, each step heavier than the last. They passed rooms where families gathered around bedsides, where monitors beeped out fragile heartbeats, where pain and healing existed in equal measure. The governor had cut ribbons at hospital fundraisers, posed for photos with doctors, signed legislation about healthcare access. But he'd never actually walked these halls, never smelled the antiseptic and sickness and stubborn hope that clung to the walls. Room 214's door stood slightly ajar. Fred stopped in front of it, turned to face Connolly. "You're going to walk in there," Fred said, his voice low and steady. "You're going to look at him, and you're going to answer for what you did." "I don't," Connolly started. "Yes, you do." Fred's eyes were hard. "You know exactly what you did. The only question now is whether you're man enough to face it." Fred pushed the door open and stepped aside. Connolly's breath caught. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, slowly, he stepped forward into the room. June lay in a hospital bed, his face a map of bruises, purple and yellow blooming across his cheekbone, a bandage wrapped around his forehead, his left arm in a sling. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than he had sitting by that highway with his cardboard sign. The machines around him beeped softly, measuring life in electric pulses. When June's eyes opened and found Connolly standing in the doorway, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not fear, just recognition, the kind that cuts deeper than any accusation. "You," June said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Connolly opened his mouth, but no words came. His carefully rehearsed political speeches, his smooth deflections, his arsenal of empty phrases, all of it dried up in the face of this broken man who wouldn't look away. "You didn't even look back." The words landed like a punch. Quiet, simple, devastating. Connolly's throat tightened. There was... "Don't." June's voice was still soft, but there was steel underneath. "Don't make excuses. Don't tell me you were distracted, or it was an accident, or you didn't see me. You saw me. You hit me. And you drove away." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Behind Connolly, Fred stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. No interruption. No rescue. Just witness. "I was holding a sign," June continued, each word deliberate. "It said hungry but hopeful, and I believed it. Even after everything, losing my job, losing my home, losing people who said they loved me, I still believed things could get better, that people were good underneath." His eyes never left Connolly's face. "Then you proved me wrong." Connolly felt something crack inside his chest. Not his pride, that had already shattered on the ride over. Something deeper. Something that sounded like shame finally breaking through years of insulation. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and hated how hollow it sounded. June didn't respond, just watched him with those eyes that had seen too much and still somehow refused to look away. Fred moved into the room, holding a clipboard he'd taken from the nurse's station. He set it on the rolling table beside June's bed, then turned to Connolly. "Hospital bills," Fred said flatly. "Ambulance, emergency room, x-rays, overnight observation. Comes to about $12,000 so far. June here doesn't have insurance, doesn't have anyone to cover it." He held out a pen. "You're going to sign as the responsible party. You're going to make sure every cent gets paid." Connolly stared at the clipboard. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. This would be documented, traceable, admission of fault that his lawyers would scream about, that his PR team would call career suicide. But June's voice echoed in his mind. "You didn't even look back." He signed. His name, Matthew James Connolly, looked strange on the hospital form, stripped of titles and power. Just a name. Just a man who'd done something unforgivable and was beginning to understand the weight of it. Fred took the clipboard, examined the signature, then nodded. First step. First, Connolly's voice cracked. You think paying a bill makes this right? Fred's expression was granite. You've got a long way to go, Governor, and we're going to walk every step with you. June shifted in his bed, wincing with pain. His eyes found Connolly's one more time, and in them, the governor saw no forgiveness, no absolution, just the reflection of a man who'd been invisible his whole life, finally refusing to disappear. Get out, June said quietly. Connolly left the room on unsteady legs, Fred behind him, the signed papers in hand like evidence at a trial that had only just begun. Outside, the convoy waited. The night was darker now, the stars more distant, and somewhere inside Matthew Connolly, something that had been sleeping for years began, painfully, to wake. The story broke at dawn. Connolly woke to the sound of his phone vibrating across the nightstand like an angry hornet. Texts, calls, notifications cascading in an avalanche of digital panic. He grabbed it with a shaking hand, squinting at the screen through exhausted eyes that had barely closed all night. The headline hit him like a second collision. Governor spotted with Hell's Angels after alleged hit and run. What really happened? Below it, photos, grainy but unmistakable. Him climbing onto Fred's motorcycle. Him walking into the county hospital flanked by leather-vested bikers. Him signing papers at June's bedside, his face pale and drawn in the harsh fluorescent light. Someone had been watching. Someone always was. His phone rang. Marcus, his aide, voice pitched high with barely controlled hysteria. Sir, we have a situation. Every major outlet is running the story. Social media is exploding. We need to get ahead of this now. Connolly sat up, his head pounding. Beside him, his wife Catherine stirred, her silk sleep mask still covering her eyes. What's going on? She murmured. Nothing, he lied automatically. Go back to sleep. But she was already pulling off the mask, reaching for her own phone. Within seconds, her face went white. Matthew, what the hell is this? He didn't answer. Couldn't. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. By noon, his mansion was under siege. News vans lined the street. Satellite dishes pointed at his home like weapons. Reporters shouted questions at his security team. Helicopters circled overhead. The carefully maintained fortress of his life had become a fishbowl, every movement scrutinized, every silence interpreted as guilt. His PR team assembled in the study. 6 people talking over each other, throwing out strategies like drowning swimmers grabbing at debris. We deny everything. Say the photos are misleading. We claim you were conducting outreach with local motorcycle clubs. We pivot to mental health advocacy. You were visiting a constituent in crisis. We attack the Hell's Angels. Paint them as extortionists, criminals trying to shake down a public official. Catherine stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the media circus below. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. Where you could tell the truth. The room went silent. Absolutely not, the lead PR consultant said immediately. The truth is political suicide. Admission of guilt opens him up to lawsuits, criminal charges, recall petitions. I don't care. Catherine turned to face them, and Connolly saw something in her expression he hadn't seen in years. Disgust. My husband hit a man and left him on the side of the road. That's the truth. And if you think I'm going to stand next to him at a press conference and lie about it, you're insane. Catherine, Connolly started. Don't. She held up a hand. I've watched you spin and deflect and manipulate for 20 years. I've stood by you through scandals and affairs and corruption that made my skin crawl. But this, she gestured at the chaos outside. This is a line, even for you. She left the room, her heels clicking against marble, the door closing behind her with devastating finality. The PR team looked at Connolly expectantly, waiting for instructions. But he had none. For the first time in his career, he was out of moves. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. We still have the original footage. Haven't released it. Won't. Unless you make us. Fred. Connolly stared at the message, his mind racing. They could have destroyed him already. Could have released the full video. HD quality, multiple angles, irrefutable proof. It would have been the end. Impeachment. Prosecution. Prison maybe. But they hadn't. Why? The question haunted him as the day bled into evening. As his PR team drafted and redrafted statements he couldn't bring himself to approve, as news anchors dissected his character with surgical precision. The bikers weren't playing by the rules he understood. They didn't want money or power or revenge. They wanted something he'd forgotten how to give. The next morning, Connolly did something he hadn't done in years. He dismissed his security detail, climbed into his personal car, not the state SUV, just his own sedan, and drove to the county hospital alone. He parked in the back lot where no one would recognize him, pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes, and walked through the sliding doors like any other visitor. No announcement, no entourage, just a man with nowhere left to hide. Room 214's door was closed. He knocked softly. "Come in," June's voice called, weaker than yesterday. Connolly entered. June was sitting up, picking at a breakfast tray, his bruised face turned toward the window. When he saw who it was, his expression closed like a door. "What do you want?" June asked flatly. Connolly's prepared words died in his throat. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "Why?" The question was simple, devastating. "Because Connolly started again. "Because I owe you more than a signature on a piece of paper." June set down his plastic fork. "You don't owe me anything. You owe yourself." A long look in the mirror at what you become. Silence stretched between them. Outside, a helicopter's distant thrum reminded Connolly that the world was still watching, still waiting for him to stumble. "I came back," he said quietly, stupidly, like that meant something. "Congratulations." June's voice was acid. "You want a medal for doing the bare minimum?" Connolly flinched. He tried again the next day, and the day after. Each time, June said less. Sometimes nothing at all. Just watched him with those eyes that stripped away titles and power and left only the truth. That Matthew Connolly was a man who'd forgotten how to be human. On the fourth day, Fred was waiting in the hallway when Connolly emerged from June's room. "He won't talk to me," Connolly said, frustration bleeding through. Can you blame him? Fred's expression was unreadable. "I'm trying. I'm here. What more does he want?" "Forgiveness ain't free, Governor." Fred's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You don't earn it by showing up. You earn it by changing who you are." "I'm paying his bills. I signed the papers." You did the paperwork." Fred cut him off. "That's not the same as doing the work." Connolly sagged against the wall, all the fight draining out of him. "Then what do I do?" Fred studied him for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. He showed Connolly an address. "Be there tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp." The address led to a homeless shelter on the east side, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and a line of people already forming outside when Connolly arrived in the pre-dawn darkness. He parked across the street, watching through his windshield as volunteers set up folding tables, carried out boxes of food, greeted each person in line by name. Real people, doing real work. No cameras, no applause. Fred's motorcycle rumbled up beside his car. The big man dismounted, walked over, tapped on Connolly's window. "You coming?" Fred asked when Connolly rolled it down. "I don't. What am I supposed to do here?" "Watch. Learn. See what you've been too important to notice." Connolly got out of the car and followed Fred across the street. The volunteers glanced at him, some with curiosity, some with recognition and instant distrust, but no one stopped him. Fred handed him a pair of work gloves. Tables need unloading. Food needs serving. People need dignity. Fred's eyes were hard. "Think you can manage that?" Connolly took the gloves. For 3 hours, he worked in silence, carrying boxes, setting out plates, watching his people like June, people he'd driven past 1,000 times without seeing, formed quiet lines, and accepted food with gratitude that made his chest ache. An old veteran with one leg missing thanked him for coffee. A young mother with 2 kids smiled tiredly when he helped carry her bag of groceries. A teenager who couldn't have been more than 16 looked him in the eye and said, "God bless you, man." Each interaction was a mirror. each face a reminder of how far he'd fallen from anything resembling humanity. When the shelter closed for the afternoon, Connolly sat on the curb outside, gloves still on his hands, watching the last few people disappear down the street. Fred sat beside him, lighting a cigarette. "My whole career," Connolly said quietly, "I've talked about serving people, helping communities, making a difference." He laughed, a bitter sound. "I didn't know a damn thing about any of it." Fred exhaled smoke. "Now you do. Is it too late? For your career? Probably." Fred glanced at him. "For your soul? That's up to you." Connolly sat there as the sun climbed. The sun barely crested the horizon when Fred's knock rattled Connolly's front door. No phone call, no warning, just the sound of knuckles against wood and the rumble of motorcycles idling in the driveway. Connolly opened the door in wrinkled clothes, the same jeans and plain t-shirt he'd worn to the shelter yesterday. His designer suits hung untouched in the closet now, relics of a life that felt increasingly distant. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours in days. "Get dressed," Fred said. "We're riding." "Where? Does it matter?" Connolly grabbed his jacket. Not the leather one he didn't own, just a worn canvas thing he'd found in the back of his closet, and followed Fred outside. The other bikers were already mounted, engines purring. AK tossed him a helmet without a word. This time, Connolly climbed onto the back of Fred's bike without hesitation. His body knew the rhythm now. Lean with the turns, hold steady, trust the rider. As they pulled out of the driveway, he caught a glimpse of Catherine watching from an upstairs window, her expression unreadable. Then they were gone, swallowed by the highway. They rode for an hour into hill country, away from Austin sprawl, in a territory where towns were 3 buildings and a gas station, where poverty wasn't an abstract concept, but a lived reality etched into sagging porches and dusty yards. The convoy turned off the main road onto gravel, then dirt, finally stopping outside a cluster of weathered tents and makeshift shelters. A veteran camp. Men and women emerged from the tents, some young, some ancient, all carrying the particular weariness of people the world had used and discarded. They wore military surplus and Salvation Army castoffs. Their eyes held stories that politicians promised to honor every election cycle and forgot the moment votes were counted. "Morning, Fred," called an older man with a gray ponytail and a purple heart tattooed on his forearm. "Didn't expect you back so soon. Brought someone who needs to see this, Tommy." Fred dismounted, then gestured to Connolly. "This is Matthew. No title, no governor, just a name." Tommy's eyes narrowed with recognition, but he didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and turned back to his tent. Fred pulled supplies from the saddlebags, canned food, blankets, propane canisters. The other bikers did the same, moving with practiced efficiency. Connolly stood awkwardly, unsure where to fit in this choreography of compassion. "Don't just stand there," Ricky said, shoving a box of canned goods into his arms. "Those folks over by the fire pit need food." Connolly carried the box across the camp, his expensive shoes sinking into mud from last night's rain. A woman sat by the fire pit with 2 small children. Couldn't have been more than 6 and 8 years old. She looked up at him with exhausted eyes that had stopped expecting kindness. "Where should I?" Connolly gestured helplessly at the box. "Just set it down." Her voice was flat, stripped of inflection. "Thank you." He set it down but didn't leave. "Your kids, are they okay?" The woman's jaw tightened. "They're alive. That's about all I can promise right now. There must be programs, services, programs." She laughed bitter. "You mean the ones with wait lists 6 months long? The ones that require addresses we don't have? The ones that close at 5 when people like me are still trying to find work?" She shook her head. "Save your speeches, mister. I've heard them all." Connolly opened his mouth, then closed it. Every policy proposal he'd ever championed suddenly felt like ash on his tongue. He'd signed legislation about veteran support, homeless assistance, child welfare, all from behind a mahogany desk, all with photo ops and press releases. He'd never stood in the mud and looked into the eyes of the people those policies were supposed to help. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She studied him for a moment, something shifting in her expression. "Yeah, you look like you might actually mean that. Over the next 3 hours, Connolly worked. Really worked. He helped set up tents, hauled water from a nearby creek, distributed supplies. His hands, soft from years of handshakes and pen signing, began to blister. His back ached. Sweat soaked through his shirt. And he didn't stop. Fred watched from a distance, exchanging glances with AK and Ricky. Silent questions passing between them. Is this real? Or was this just another performance? They rode to 2 more camps that day, then to a food bank operating out of a church basement, where Connolly spent 4 hours sorting donations and loading boxes into the trucks of families who drove up with empty trunks and full hearts of shame. Then to a recovery center, where addicts in various stages of sobriety stared at him with the particular skepticism of people who'd been promised help before and received only judgment. At each stop, Connolly said less and did more. His political instincts, the urge to explain, to justify, to spin, slowly quieted. Instead, he listened to the veteran who'd served 3 tours and come home to nothing, to the single father working 2 jobs and still couldn't afford rent, to the teenager who'd aged out of foster care and had nowhere to go. Each story was a stone in his chest, weighing him down and somehow, paradoxically, grounding him in something that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. On the 5th day, they returned to the hospital. June was being discharged, moving slowly, still bandaged but alive and upright. When he emerged through the sliding doors and saw the motorcycle convoy waiting, he stopped. "What's this?" June asked Fred. "Thought you might want to see what we've been up to." Fred gestured to Connolly, who stood off to the side, deliberately not approaching. "Your friend here's been making the rounds." June's eyes found Connolly. No warmth there. But maybe, just maybe, the ice was beginning to crack. "You coming or not?" Fred asked June. June hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, all right." They rode to a food shelter on the west side, bigger than the others, serving lunch to over 200 people daily. Connolly had cut the ribbon at its opening 2 years ago, smiled for cameras, made a speech about community and compassion. He'd never come back. Now he stood in the kitchen, elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing industrial-sized pots while June worked beside him at the prep station, slowly chopping vegetables with his good hand. Neither spoke for the first hour. Just the rhythm of work and the clatter of dishes and the low hum of people being fed in the room beyond. Finally, June broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" Connolly didn't look up from the pot he was scrubbing. "Because I should have been doing it all along." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Connolly set down the pot, his blistered hands raw and red. "You asked me why I didn't look back. Truth is, I haven't been looking at anything real for years. Just poll numbers and approval ratings, and whatever made me look good." He finally met June's eyes. "I'm tired of being that man." June studied him, his expression unreadable. "Lots of people get tired of who they are. Most don't change." "I know. So how do I know this isn't just damage control? Politics by another name?" "You don't," Connolly admitted. "I can't prove it to you with words. Only time and action. And I understand if that's not enough." June turned back to his vegetables, silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My sign said hungry, but hopeful. You remember that?" "I remember. I stopped being hopeful after you hit me. Figured maybe the world really was as cold as it looked." June's knife paused mid-chop. "But then these crazy bikers showed up. Stayed with me. Made sure I was okay. Made you face what you did." He glanced at Connolly. "Maybe hope's stubborn. Keeps showing up even when you tell it to leave." Across the kitchen, Fred leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the 2 men work side by side. AK joined him, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. "Think it's real?" AK asked quietly. Fred was silent for a moment. "Don't know yet, but he's doing the work. That's more than most ever manage." Ricky walked over, wiping grease from his hands. "He cried today, at the veteran camp. Thought he was hiding it, but I saw." "Crying's easy," Fred said. "Changing is hard. So we keep watching." AK flicked ash into a paper cup. "We keep watching," Fred confirmed. "But maybe we start hoping too." In the kitchen, Connolly's hands moved mechanically through the dishwater, blisters breaking and reforming, pain sharp and grounding. June worked beside him in careful silence. And somewhere in the rhythm of that shared labor, something began to shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the fragile possibility of it. The first crack in a wall that had stood for far too long. The press conference was supposed to happen 3 weeks ago. Connolly's team had drafted statements, rehearsed deflections, prepared a careful dance of admission without guilt that politicians had perfected over centuries. But Connolly had canceled it, then canceled it again, and again, until today, when he walked into the State House briefing room unannounced, without notes, without his PR team, and stood before a sea of cameras that suddenly snapped to attention like sharks scenting blood. The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, flashbulbs firing, the chaos of a feeding frenzy. Connolly raised one hand, and something in his posture, or maybe the hollowness in his eyes, made them quiet. "I'm not here to spin a story," he began, his voice steady but stripped of its usual polish. "I'm here to tell the truth." Behind the cameras, his aide Marcus went pale. This wasn't the script. There was no script. 3 weeks ago, I was driving on Highway 290 when I struck a homeless man named June Williams. I didn't stop immediately. I considered driving away. And when I finally did stop, it wasn't because of conscience, it was because I got caught. The room went dead silent. Not even the click of cameras. Just stunned, suffocating silence. Connolly continued, each word deliberate. "I've spent my career talking about serving the people of Texas, about leadership, integrity, compassion. But when faced with a moment that required all of those things, I failed completely. I chose self-preservation over humanity. I chose power over decency." A reporter in the front row found her voice. "Governor, are you resigning?" "I don't know yet," Connolly said honestly. "That's not the question I'm trying to answer right now. The question is, how does a man who forgot how to be human remember?" Another reporter, "The Hells Angels were involved. Were you coerced?" "No." Connolly's jaw tightened. "They gave me something I didn't deserve, a chance to do the right thing. They could have destroyed me with the footage they had. Instead, they showed me what real leadership looks like. It doesn't come with a title or a mansion. It comes from showing up, doing the work, and caring about people when there's no cameras watching." "So the rumors are true? You've been volunteering at shelters?" "Yes, and veteran camps, and food banks." He paused. "Not for publicity, not for redemption, because it's what I should have been doing all along instead of just talking about it." On a screen behind him, footage began to play. Not the hit and run, but something else. Someone had been recording. Him at the shelters. Him carrying boxes. Him sitting with June in that hospital room. Head bowed, shoulders slumped under the weight of his own shame. The room exploded again. Questions firing like bullets. But Connolly raised his hand once more. "If leadership means silence after wrongdoing, then I was never a leader. Real leadership means accountability. It means facing what you've done and working to be better." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know if I can be better, but I'm going to spend every day trying." He walked off the podium without taking questions, leaving chaos in his wake. Across town, in a dive bar with a busted neon sign and sawdust on the floor, Fred sat at the counter nursing a beer. AK and Ricky flanked him, along with a dozen other angels scattered throughout the room. The TV above the bar played Connolly's press conference on repeat, news anchors dissecting every word, every pause, every crack in his voice. "Well," AK said finally. "Didn't expect that." Fred said nothing, just watched the screen, his expression unreadable. "Think he means it?" Ricky asked. "Words are cheap," Fred replied quietly. "Always have been." On the television, a political analyst was already spinning narratives, calling it a calculated move, a sympathy play, political theater designed to salvage a dying career. The usual cynicism that greeted any moment of apparent sincerity in public life. But then another clip played. A citizen interview from outside the State House. An older black woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "I've been homeless," she said to the reporter. "And I've watched politicians talk about us like we're problems to solve, not people to help. But that man," she gestured toward the building behind her. "He looked broken, really broken. And sometimes Broken's the only way people learn to be whole. The bar went quiet. Fred took a long drink of his beer, set it down, and stood. Come on, where are we going? AK asked, to see if words turn into action. Fred pulled on his jacket. That's when we'll know. The bikers filed out into the parking lot, engines roaring to life one by one. Above them, the Texas sky stretched wide and endless, holding its breath. Inside the State House, Connolly sat alone in his office, staring at his resignation letter, already typed and signed, waiting. His phone buzzed constantly. Calls from allies urging him to fight. Calls from enemies smelling blood. Calls from reporters wanting more. He ignored them all. Instead, he pulled up a different document. A list of every shelter, every veteran camp, every food bank within 100 miles. Places that needed volunteers. Places that needed funding. Places that needed someone to show up and do the unglamorous, unrecorded work of actually helping. His hand hovered over the keyboard, and then, slowly, he began to type. 6 months had passed since the press conference. 6 months since the governor's mansion went dark and the nameplate came off the door. 6 months since Matthew Connolly stopped being governor and became just Matthew, a man with calloused hands and a quiet routine that started before dawn. The shelter on the east side had become his second home, or maybe his first real one. He lost track of which was which anymore. He arrived at 5:30 every morning, parking his aging sedan, the state SUV long since returned, in the gravel lot beside the dumpsters. No fanfare, no recognition, just another pair of hands showing up to do the work. Inside, the kitchen was already warm, the industrial ovens humming to life. And there, flipping pancakes on the griddle with practiced ease, was June. He'd taken a job 3 months ago, part-time at first, then full. His bruises had faded to memory, but he still moved carefully, favoring his left side where the ribs had cracked. The shelter director said he had a gift for it, cooking, feeding people, making them feel seen. Maybe it was because he'd been invisible so long himself. Matthew grabbed an apron without being asked, tying it around his waist. Morning, morning, June replied, not looking up from the griddle. But there was warmth in his voice now, not forgiveness that had come slowly, earned in increments of scraped dishes and sorted donations, but something close. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of peace. They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythm of their mornings synchronized after months of repetition. Matthew prepped vegetables. June managed the stoves. By 6:15, the doors opened and the line began. 50 people, then 100, then more. Faces he knew now, names he'd learned, stories he carried. Maria with her 2 kids. Tommy the veteran with the Purple Heart. The teenager who'd aged out of foster care and was saving for community college. Each person a reminder of what he'd been too powerful to see before. The breakfast rush ended around 9. Matthew was scrubbing down the prep station when June appeared beside him with a tray, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, and a small bowl of fruit. Dinner's on me tonight, June said softly, then smiled at his own mistake. Breakfast, I mean. Matthew stared at the tray, his throat suddenly tight. It was the same meal June had been eating the day they first worked side by side in this kitchen. The day everything started to shift. You don't have to, Matthew started. I know. June set the tray down on the counter between them. But I want to. Their eyes met. No words needed. Just the weight of everything that had passed between them. The impact, the hospital, the anger, the slow thaw, the shared labor that had rebuilt something broken into something new. Matthew took the tray to a corner table, and June joined him with his own. They ate in companionable silence, watching volunteers set up for the lunch shift, watching people come and go through doors that never closed. You ever miss it? June asked finally. The power, the mansion, all of it. Matthew considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss the illusion that I was doing something important. But no, I don't miss the man I was. June nodded slowly. Good. Because he was kind of an asshole. Matthew laughed. A real laugh, the kind that shook his shoulders and brought tears to his eyes. June grinned. And for a moment, they were just 2 men sharing breakfast and the strange, improbable peace of second chances. After the meal, Matthew walked outside to throw away trash. The late morning sun warmed the asphalt. Across the street, a new mural had appeared sometime in the last month. Bright colors splashed across weathered brick. It showed two figures, one helping the other to stand, neither face detailed enough to identify, but the gesture unmistakable. Beneath it, in bold letters, "Respect has no title." Matthew stared at it, something settling in his chest. Pride, maybe, or humility, or both at once. Then he heard it, the familiar rumble growing louder. He turned as the motorcycles appeared, a dozen of them rolling down the street in loose formation. Fred led them, his gray beard catching the sunlight, AK and Ricky flanking him like always. They didn't stop, didn't wave, just rode past, engines growling their approval or acknowledgement, or maybe just their presence. A reminder that someone was still watching, still holding him accountable, still believing he could be better than he'd been. Fred glanced over as they passed, and their eyes met for just a second. A nod, nothing more. Then they were gone, chrome flashing, thunder fading into the distance, swallowed by the city's noise and the endless Texas sky. Matthew stood there long after the sound disappeared, his hands still smelling of dish soap and cooking oil, his back aching from hours of work that would never make headlines or earn applause. Inside, June called his name. More food to prep, more people to serve, more quiet work that mattered in ways speeches never could. Matthew turned back toward the shelter, toward the kitchen where he belonged now, toward the life he'd built from the rubble of the one he'd lost. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something he'd forgotten existed. Respect. Not from others, not yet, maybe not ever, but from himself. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to remember what respect feels like. If you believe that no one, no matter how powerful, is above accountability, and that real change starts when we stop hiding behind titles and start showing up as human beings, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories like this that remind us what true leadership and redemption look like. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.